Good evening, everyone. My name is Cheryl Wilson, and I am proud to say that I am the director of the Kansas Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution. And we want to welcome you tonight to Bethel College, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Dan Wasink.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Dan Wasink, as Cheryl said. I actually manage our Community Mediation Center here at KIPCOR. We're glad to have all of you tonight. It's a great turnout. People are still streaming in, and I assume that's going to continue for a while. We have a great evening planned for you with Sarah Smarsh. And before we get to her, though, I'm going to pass it over, I believe, to Lindsay, or back to Cheryl. Sorry.
Thank you again. Thank you, Dan. I just want to welcome you all as you have come into this space, the webinar space. I wish I could see your faces, but if you get a chance, I think it would be really cool as we connect at different times when you are able to use the Q&A function at the end to tell people where you are in the country when you ask your question, because I think that will be of great interest to all of us to know how far we are reaching out tonight. It is indeed a pleasure to have all of you here. I wanted to take this time. We wanted to thank the many people who have helped to make this night possible. But we have some sponsors that actually gave generously so that we could have this tremendous event. And I wanted to thank them right now. And I'm just going to list out the names of the people who generously gave tonight. Dorothy Nicole Friesen, Wes and Ada Schmidt-Thiessen, Christine Downey-Schmidt, Doug and Raylene Penner, Bob and Donna Becker, Richard and Donna Zerger, Jeanette and Stephen Stuckey, and this is also in the memory of Jacob and Lois Friesen. We have other sponsors that are local businesses that have graciously sponsored us in book sales. We have Faith and Life Books. Thank you very much, Bethany Martin. And we also have KMUW, who has they've done a great job in promoting this event throughout the whole Wichita metro area. So thank you. And so with that, I want to recognize our people who are going to be sharing with us tonight. And I'm going to pass it on to our student worker, and her name is Lindsay Fonestill, and I'll have you come on up now. Lindsay, you are muted.
Okay, I got it now. Good evening. My name is Lindsay Fonestill. I am a sophomore social work major here at Bethel College. On behalf of Bethel College, we welcome you. We look forward to hearing from each and every one of you tonight. With that being said, I would like to invite Bethel College President John Gehring to present his remarks. Please welcome President Gehring.
Thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate the opportunity to present some brief remarks. Welcome, everybody. I'm delighted that you're here this evening. And I also want to provide a warm Thresher welcome to you, Sarah. We're happy that you're with us. Your presence here this evening is appropriate and much needed. And to my mind, you stand for many of the things that Bethel College holds dear. I'd like to take just a moment to explain what I mean. Bethel College was chartered in 1887, and construction started in 1888 on what is now the historic administration building on our campus here in North Newton, Kansas. Bethel was the first Mennonite college founded in North America. And the Mennonites, having just immigrated to the United States, aspired to start a college that would be non-sectarian and aimed at providing a robust education for students, primarily at that time from the local communities. The Mennonites were rural and hardworking. The sphere of influence of Bethel College grew with society, and a student body that was primarily local grew rapidly to include members from many other states and countries. What started as a school for preachers and teachers became a progressive Christian liberal arts college, along with many other small private colleges in the state of Kansas. In recent years, Bethel has adopted a new distinct mission for the 21st century: to graduate students who increase human flourishing in society by owning and enacting their faith, engaging in critical thought, and bringing value to the workplace. We care a lot here at Bethel about peace and justice, vocational discernment, and specifically dialogue that transforms conflict. These Anabaptist values flow through our society like water, always finding a way to overcome, erode, or bypass obstacles to a better world. You've done so much in your writing to address these themes. For that, we are grateful and feel a sense of resonance with your work. Bethel is fortunate to be complemented in its mission by affiliate organizations, including the Kansas Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, or KIPCOR. The mission of KIPCOR is to strengthen conflict resolution and peace-building capacities in the communities and institutions it serves. It carries out this mission by encouraging research, education, skill development, and dialogue to enhance the understanding and practice of managing conflict, and to prepare individuals and groups to be peacemakers in an evolving, complex, and sometimes troubled world. Like Bethel, KIPCOR's programs are rooted in Anabaptist or Christian values of reconciliation, service, appreciation of diversity, personal transformation and integrity, and nonviolence and peace building within the context of social justice. KIPCOR is celebrating its 35-year anniversary, and it was the oldest and most recognized peace-building centers in the United States. I also want to take a moment to recognize Cheryl Wilson, the executive director of KIPCOR. Cheryl became the director of KIPCOR in 2017. She holds degrees from the University of Minnesota, a Bachelor of Science in Mediation and Communication Studies, as well as a Master of Liberal Studies with a focus in restorative justice. Along with her capable staff who are helping tonight, Cheryl fulfills several roles at KIPCOR. For example, she mediates in conflict resolution cases, teaches courses for KIPCOR and Bethel College, serves as a trainer and facilitator, and is a racial justice leader on the Bethel College campus. Most of all, she is a welcoming and caring Bethel College community member. In addition, Cheryl writes on subjects that explore the relationship between the restorative justice movement and racial reconciliation. She recently contributed a chapter to the book, Colorizing Restorative Justice, a volume about restorative justice practitioners of color and the challenges they face. Some of you may know that today is a day of giving for KIPCOR, and you may have noticed Cheryl's presence on social media today. I want to encourage all of you to give generously to KIPCOR, its important mission, and the work that it does for our society. Again, welcome to all of you, and Sarah, a special welcome again to you. Cheryl, I think I'm turning it back to you.
Yes. And speaking of today being a day of giving, I would be remiss if I didn't share a beautiful piece that we are so proud to premiere tonight. For those of you who weren't able to join us on social media or on YouTube today, we want to premiere a video that just captures everything that is great about KIPCOR. I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to share this with you now.
KIPCOR. It's the Kansas Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution. And we are, at this year, as a matter of fact, we're celebrating 35 years as one of the oldest peace institutions in the country. We do conflict resolution work as a mediation center for programming that we do with divorcing and separating parents. And then we also just do cases that are in the community. Like if students, for instance, at Bethel were involved in a conflict, they could come to us free of charge and they would be able to work through their situation through processes that we would facilitate. We have hosted a plethora of events. We currently are in the throes of doing a peace lecture series. We'll have Sarah Smarsh here as our 2020 peace lecturer. But we've had many people who've come through our doors as peace lecturers, like Sister Helen Prejean, Kathleen Kennedy, Leonard Pitts most recently. So we feel very proud that we're able to bring those types of folks here and have them share their different views on peacemaking, social justice, all of those different things. And it's right here in Bethel in North Newton. We offer a large offering of classes that teach people everything from facilitation to mediation, different versions of mediation, and managing different types of conflict from just two people to large groups. KIPCOR has been a place where we have trained educators in restorative practices. Restorative justice is one of the ways that people manage conflict in very holistic ways. It's a way that people can look at how to repair the harm in a lot of different settings where we're looking at who those people are in terms of the people who might have been harmed. We're looking at the parties who have created the harm, and we're also looking at the ways that the harm impacted the community. So in the classroom is one of those ways that we're hoping we can work with educators throughout the state, which is something we're very proud that we've been able to work with over 1,000 teachers in the state of Kansas in restorative practices at different schools and school districts around the state.
I think the work that we do is really important, and that's probably why I've stuck with it this long. We have the ability to help parents do better at what they're doing, and that's probably, to me, the key of what we do.
And what I found most fulfilling is not just helping people solve their problems. I mean, that's important. That's important in what we do. However, it's giving them tools to figure things out on their own in the long term. Because we're happy to help folks, but at the end of the day, we want to give them tools that they can use to come up with their own solutions, because we know those are the best solutions, the most sustainable solutions. Going to court and fighting things out is never the best option. So if we can give people alternatives to that, that again create a safe environment for them to work things out themselves, I think giving them those alternatives, and we really do, it sounds corny, but I think we do really transform lives in the process because of that.
Much of the work that we do is confidential, but the work that we do is important because it transforms lives. We are not the first responders like firemen or like police officers, but I do consider us to be some of the most important responders, because when conflict happens in society, we don't really know what people do with that when it's just not dealt with. We just see the effects of it when someone acts out in horrible ways in society. But if we can give people tools, if we can help them to understand the importance of why these types of skills are important, then I feel like we've done a good job.
Thank you. I just want to let everyone know there were people who gave generously today, and I know people are curious as to how much we've raised so far. Our goal for today was, and today goes into tomorrow, okay? Our goal is $10,000. We are a little shy of $3,000 right now. And I'm counting on you all to make up the difference tonight. I hope that presenting programming like this will compel you to continue to give to KIPCOR. And now that you have, if you didn't know, I hope that you've learned a little bit more about what we do and feel a desire to give. We will report back tomorrow on social media and on our website how close we get to our goal. But thank you so much to those of you who have given generously to us today and watched me do all kinds of acrobatics on my phone with social media today. So thank you for that. And now I want to shift into what you came here tonight for. And we are so pleased we have been in this relationship for a year almost with Sarah, trying to get her here. And I just want to tell a few things anecdotally about how this came to be. I got the opportunity to present at a night talking about democracy on tap through KMUW. Sarah happened to be there. And I came back to work the next day and I got this lovely email from Sarah complimenting some of the comments that I made. And I shared it with my coworker and she just freaked out and she goes, "That was Sarah Smarsh." So at that point, I said, "Tell me more in terms of how she resonates." I knew a little about her book, but I'm not from this part of the country. But she said that Sarah is someone that if we were to connect with her, that people in this community would so be interested. And were they? Many people have been buzzing about you ever since I raised the idea to bring you here. And when I went to a book signing, it was so cool to connect with you again. And I said, "I want to bring you to Bethel." And you said, "Let's make that happen." And so here we are, we're making it happen. We're not making it happen in the way that we thought, but that is okay. I just want to say a little about Sarah. Many of you have read her bio, but I want to just remind you of who we have with us. She focuses on the socioeconomic class in rural America. Her book that resonates with us, Heartland, a memoir of working hard and being broke in the richest country on earth, was an instant New York Best Times bestseller and a finalist for the National Book Award. And it examines the economic inequality through her upbringing among the working poor on a Kansas farm. Sarah is a regular commentator on national media and has spoken internationally on poverty, rural issues, and cultural divides at venues ranging from small town libraries to the Sydney Opera House. Sarah was recently a fellow at Harvard's Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy. In 2019, she released a podcast entitled The Homecomers, which focuses on the national blind spot toward rural and working class America and how it is driving misleading headlines, broken politics, and dangerous fissures in our social fabric. The podcast showcases stories of people who, as residents or advocates, remain committed to their complex, embattled homes. In recent times, she has written her new book, She Come By It Natural, Dolly Parton and the Women Who Lived Her Songs, which has just come out. And we are so happy that you are a fellow Kansan. And I know that is why many people feel like your story is their story. And I'm so grateful to have you here tonight. Let's give Sarah, in the best ways that we can with our energy, a very warm welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cheryl. What a wonderful introduction, and thank you to Jonathan and everyone who's involved in this evening, from the funders to all of you who are joining us this evening by the hundreds, it looks like. And I think that's pretty considerable, since I don't know if you've heard, but there's some wild times going on in current events. And the fact that you are choosing to spend this moment of your evening with us sure means a lot. And I just want to, before I get started, quickly circle back to Cheryl's point about how we connected. She shared that story quite humbly, but the whole impetus for my connecting her was that she was just like exuding brilliance. And I was looking around thinking, I agree with everything she's saying, and that doesn't happen very often. So I'm so happy that connection was a conduit that resulted in this event. And I'm sure sorry that we couldn't all be together in person as was originally scheduled last spring. But so goes our current reality, and we are making it happen. And I can feel all your good energy, and I hope that you feel mine, because this is a moment when we need some. And I am, by the way, looking forward to chatting with you all after I make my remarks. So I hope that you've got questions and comments. Normally in the shared physicality of a traditional event in a three-dimensional space, we would all be feeling perhaps more of a dialogue, and we're definitely making room for that. But the first thing that I want to tell you about where I'm going tonight is I am fortunate, as Cheryl mentioned, to give quite a few talks, and now I'm privileged to have my voice heard in various ways. Usually I'm saying some variation of a similar message, different iterations depending on the audience, but I'm almost always talking very specifically about socioeconomic class as that intersects with other aspects of identity, and often with a mind to rural issues, because I come from rural Kansas. And by the way, it's awesome to know that this event, while it might be reaching across the nation, even the world, is grounded in my home state, which I'm proud to still be a resident of. But I'm usually talking about those themes of my work, and that is going to come up tonight. But you know, I thought this is this series, which is esteemed, and I'm so honored to follow such incredible speakers in this lineup that KIPCOR makes possible. The Peace Lecture by way of the Kansas Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, I thought, you know, between that and the fact that this rescheduled virtual event happens to fall 2 days after the election, when we are in this sort of suspended moment together as a society and a nation, I'm gonna go in a little bit of a different direction. And so I hope you'll walk with me. I'm going to focus, and I think perhaps appropriately after watching that great video from KIPCOR, on the ways in which our most private, intimate, domestic lives reverberate into the public sphere. Because what's going down right now in Washington and across the country, and with the ballot counting and the debates and the rancor and the policies and all of these conversations that you'll find on the evening news, you know, we roughly put that in this public framework, and then we've got our private lives. But what is that public framework if not a reflection ultimately of what we are all carrying around in our hearts and minds, constructing this society that we to some extent inherited, but also have a responsibility and a hand in reconstructing every day. So we're going to go a little bit deep. The first thing to that end that I want you all to do, because I know you've had your cell phone in your hand all day. I want us all to take a deep breath together. Okay, so on the count of 3, we're going to breathe in and breathe out. Okay, 1, 2, 3. All right, that felt good. So getting grounded in this moment, let's kind of recognize where we're at. You might be feeling kind of helpless, actually, in this moment. If you're just on that phone looking at headlines that, frankly, are a product of my industry as a journalist. There are a few reasons why I'm a little bit of an outlier in my own industry. And one of them is that I think that we have enough regurgitation of information over and over, and perhaps not enough dwelling in our deepest selves to make sense of that information. Right now, that information, of course, concerns the outcome of a presidential election, which has everything to do with a very sharp and harrowing divide in our society, our politics, our culture. And my writing, which, as I said, often focuses on socioeconomic, class, and rural issues, is very much about reconciliation of that sort of divide. I started writing that book long before this kind of current political era that we find ourselves in. But my kind of late 20th century upbringing and coming of age contains some stories, and I believe is sort of a springboard to revealing how perhaps we got to the state that we're in. And the state that we're in now is seemingly in what feels like a rather short amount of time has transformed from one of debate to one of just utter fracture. This feels in many ways like a broken place, doesn't it? And depending on when you started paying attention, that might be really alarming to you. For some folks, particularly marginalized communities who have been suffering the brunt of our democracy's failures for centuries, it isn't news. But I suppose it is a good thing that even more privileged folks are now waking up to the extent to which our democratic experiment has fallen short and might require some retooling and reconsideration and work that ultimately, while we might follow the headlines about what's going on nationally, happens at the level of local community, and prior to that even, it happens inside of ourselves. So what do you do when the moment feels like it's bigger than you and you have very little recourse to affect change? Well, there's civic action, of course. There's voting, and I hope that if you were able to do so, that you did that recently. There's calling your representatives. There's peacefully demonstrating. There's there are a host of tools that we have as citizens or residents of this land that again kind of correlate to a public experience of these United States. But tonight I want to go actually beyond politics. I want to go beyond government, media, social media, the Bethel campus that some of you know, and even the streets of the towns that you come from. I want to talk about transformative action that transpires first within you. And because I was thinking like, I could run my mouth tonight and then we all go back to our lives, but it seems like these are times for action. And so what I'm going to do is lay down a challenge. Actually, in business meetings they would call them action items, I suppose, or like what are we now going to do? I'm going to give you a 2-part challenge, and it doesn't involve, you don't have to call your senator, you don't have to go anywhere outside of yourself to do it. That said, it's a formidable undertaking, what I'm going to lay down here tonight. And to my mind, whether you undertake it determines just as much and perhaps even more than the outcome of this election that's currently up in the air. Whether this society ultimately recreates itself as a better and more equitable and just place, or tears itself into and disintegrates. That might sound like hyperbolic language, but I don't think it is. And I'm going to get real frank because it's in the air and it's in the energy, whether it's been articulated or not. There is to some extent already mainstream discussions and columns in reputable newspapers using terms like civil war as a new potential reality in the ether of what's going on in our culture. And as someone who kind of just by being sort of kind of straddles two different worlds, the act of bridge building or creating harmony or unity where there is dissonance or disconnection is something that I think about all the time, and I'm going to try to apply it now to this very large context of the crisis we find ourselves in tonight as a country. My first challenge to you going inward involves a shift from pride to humility. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. We have become, in a pretty short amount of time, this was not so much true when I was a kid. I'm 40 years old, and so we're talking about like in 4 decades. I think that this country has shifted in the way that it conceives of itself politically to one that, you'll hear often now the term tribal politics. What does pride have to do with that? Well, we're very proud of our political identities now. There's the t-shirts, bumper stickers have always been around, but there's this whole thing of getting on social media to kind of feel the surge of ego boost, even of kind of sort of camaraderie with your side, and then the goal is to sort of set out to tear down the other side. There's a pride wrapped up in that. It's an identity. When we think about identity in this country, we typically think about demographic markers like gender and race and maybe geography, maybe educational attainment and so on. But we very rarely have reckoned with or understood the extent to which political ideologies too really are in the identity category. And right now they are driving a lot of very, very proud behavior that sort of amounts to like signaling, this is the side I'm on, and therefore I am superior. So what I'm critiquing right now is not standing firm in your values. What I'm critiquing is not being strong and fortified in your cause. What I am critiquing is deeming yourself superior for it, okay? So what I would like you to do, or what I challenge you to do, is to separate your ideas from yourself. And so what I mean by that is you may well have ideas that are superior to the person that you're arguing with. That may well be the case. If what we're after is a just and equitable, righteous society, if by the way, not everyone wants that. And folks who are just flat out driven by hate, I'm going to set them in a different category. And I reckon that isn't you, since you're tuning into this particular talk. What I have learned, I think last year, oh gosh, I was in a lot of airports back when that was a thing. I believe I gave something like 50 lectures last year. So just about one a week all over this country and to some extent the world. And what I found time and time and again confirms what I bet you already know and believe by way of your own community and experiences, which is Yep, there's the hateful bunch, but the majority of people, even the ones who disagree, ultimately want the same thing in a roughly. They just disagree about how to go about doing it. Now, some ideas for how to go about doing it are better than others. Okay, but what I'm saying is, even if your ideas are better, it isn't because you are innately better. And the way I know this, the way I came by, you know, the way I was humbled to this truth is that my ideas changed. I grew up in a space and a culture that presented me a certain set of ideas, and I embraced most of those ideas. Then my information sources and my environment and my peer group pretty dramatically changed when I was a very young adult. Because I basically was having a life experience that was very different from the folks I knew and loved in my home community. And suddenly I saw the world differently. Prior to my ideas changing, was I, you know, was my character any different? Was I less of a moral person? Did I have less concern for other human beings? No, no, and no. Deep down, same Sarah. What changed was the external inputs, and that change sort of opened up the possibilities in terms of ideologies and ideas, and my views changed. And so the only way I can square that very true story is to say that we are all as sort of idea carrying entities, products of our culture, our peer groups, our social environment, our information sources. You know, you could take like the same heart and mind, soul, if you like, and, you know, be it born into a wheat farm in South Central Kansas and a almost entirely white town with at the time kind of moderately conservative politics, versus that same soul be born into a Black family in Detroit versus an affluent family in Manhattan, New York. You know, there's nature about us that is perhaps indelible, but I imagine that those three life experiences are so dramatically different that the ideas and capacity for conceptualizing our political reality would be very different. So that'll go a long way in transforming whatever anger or conflict-driven emotions might be roiling around inside of you, and understandably so in these times. If you can draw that distinction between superior ideas and superior people. Because the paradox of that, of course, and an unfortunate one, is that even if your ideas are right, if you fancy yourself somehow mightier and higher than the folks with the bad ideas, then you're in very dangerous territory for becoming the very thing that you are fighting against. So that's challenge one, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my journey of coming to that bit of understanding. So I grew up on a wheat farm in Kansas. I'm a 5th generation Kansas farm kid, working that same patch of land. This is a good opportunity to say, by the way, I live in rural Kansas today, believe it or not, as a 21st century journalist. I'm joining you via hotspot because there's no broadband where I am, and these are very intentional choices that I make so that I can both better represent the place that I seek to write about, but also to just be true to myself, and this is my home and where I feel the best. But I want to mention that the place where I'm coming to you from right now is actually Kaw Nation homeland. So whenever I talk about being a 5th generation farm kid, again, I don't take some pride in that as though it's some marker of superiority. That's a legacy that was handed down amid economic hardship, certainly, and yet the color of my skin and the race that I belong to is why we ever owned a piece of land that originally was held by indigenous peoples and that people of color were precluded from owning. So I'm the first woman in my direct maternal line not to have a baby as a teenager. And most of the people I grew up around didn't finish high school, let alone college. There are outcomes, the life outcomes that were really then kind of the soup that I was formed in as their child and grandchild, had a lot more to do with forces of policy and culture than it had to do with their individual merits. So that might be a little bit counter to our ideas about the American dream. And boy, do I know the power of the individual and am reverent to it. And I believe that that power had a lot to do with some of the successes that I had in my life. But the thing is, yeah, I worked hard and I had some talent, but gosh, that's true of a lot of people that are very close to me, and it's true of millions of people across this country whose voices aren't being heard tonight. You know what I mean? So again, it's like drawing that distinction between like, is this moment because of me? No. This moment is because of infinite levels of experience that I had no direct hand in creating. And it's my responsibility then to be speaking about and hopefully somehow truthfully on behalf of the folks who can't be heard. So that kind of straddling of a class divide that I referenced earlier basically amounts to being a native daughter of rural Kansas, and the professional path that I've walked, where I've entered spaces that nobody that I knew had ever neared. I did my graduate work at an Ivy League university. Boy, was that where I found out about class divides in this country. I didn't even know I grew up poor till I got to Columbia University, and then I understood, oh, we were poor. And I shouldn't use that verb in the past tense, because I was technically by federal standards in poverty for much of my 20s. It's still the reality in which most of my intimate family lived their lives. And I'm not writing or talking about these things in the rearview mirror. I suppose that I was part of a generation who was encouraged to get out. Never really liked that language. It's like, what is rural Kansas prison? Get out. Of course, what that language is referring to is an economic dwindling, and in some places demise. That is a reality, to be sure. But the thing is, I didn't want to get out. I was happy to be where I was from and from where I was from, and I'm happy to be there still. But I have kind of a foot in two different worlds for that reason. And so this allows me to sort of call BS, if you will, on hypocrisy on both sides of the political aisle, both sides of the cultural divide, because I see them both firsthand. Now, my work as a journalist is why my vantage on that divide has a lot to do with information. You know how I kept saying we're all products of our information sources, and also our culture and our social peer groups and so on. But really, you know, if you look at like the returns in this election, it's pretty close to the same percentage of like who watches Fox News and who watches MSNBC. I have my own biases in terms of which networks are more fact-based and which are more in the realm of propaganda. but I'm also trained professionally to understand those things. And I like to think that I can set aside to some extent, my own personal biases to make those sorts of calls. And I can tell you that we are living in a very fraught media ecosystem in which, indeed, not all are equal. Some outlets are doing their best to give you facts, and others have a very clear mission statement that has to do with profit and, in some cases, disinformation. So if that's how we're divided, is our media streams and our information sources, and also more broadly our life experiences, then in that I believe we can take heart in this moment that there is, we are not a deeply divided nation in our hearts, in our deepest heart of hearts. Most of us, you put aside the folks who are driven by hate, and the majority is a good bunch who disagrees, and humbling yourself to that fact is very important in these times. Second challenge to you, and this kind of goes to my point about 21st century media being such a powerful influence in those political identities that we're walking around proudly with. I challenge you to shift from, if this is appropriate, follower to a leader. And what I mean by that does not have anything to do with sort of civic action like organizing a demonstration or founding an organization, although those are fine and important things to do. I'm thinking about follower and leader as relates to ideas. This whole thing that's going down right now in our country, it's at the level of ideas, isn't it? That's where, again, mostly we're on the same page, hearts and mind. Up here, where we're thinking about how to get things done, where we're conceiving what this reality is, whether we are motivated by fear or motivated by love, whether we're every man for himself or we're more about community. These are all conceptual forms. And when they are coming at us at full tilt, the way that they are in this digital media reality and social media reality, we've got to up our game from just sort of following the information flock. You know what I mean? So I'm going to challenge you to question what you've been told. Where did that come from? This, by the way, is not the same thing as disparaging the news media as fake news. I am a member of the American Free Press, and I set out to do that professionally out of a sense of civic duty. This country is full of underpaid researchers and reporters and information disseminators who really just want to bolster our democracy by increasing your access to true information. But true information ain't all there is out there, and that's never been the case. But today more than ever, we must be vigilant about, are you just hitting share on the thing that validates what you believe? Because it feels good to hit share and say, I knew I was right. That'd be a follower. Or as a exemplar of 21st century media literacy, are you leading the way by scrutinizing information and sharing the best and the truest of it? Even beyond just information consumption, then we have whether you're a follower or a leader in your day-to-day conversations. Are you just, again, sort of like regurgitating the points that you've been told that boost your sense of pride about which tribe you belong to? Or are you sometimes in an uncomfortable moment willing to push back, maybe not just accept the party line of your town or your family or your group of friends if it doesn't sit well with you, if it doesn't feel right. If you're able to hit pause in that way and maybe even say something about it, then you have become a leader in, yes, a small sphere of ideas, but again, that national conversation that's being had, it starts first with the little pebble dropping in the pond and that ripples out. Now, once you are kind of heightened your awareness in that regard, and you're evaluating the extent to which, okay, am I just like following the flock, or am I a responsible, perhaps even shepherd? There might be a few uncomfortable outcomes. You might, as I once did, find that the identities and labels that you have embraced no longer fit you, and you therefore set it aside and go find out who you are now. That's not easy work, but that's sort of a authentic presence in our society is what we so sorely need right now, particularly when there are so many forces at work that would love to not only manipulate your mind, but then harness the power of your voice and your labor and your ability to hit share. So, and you know, maybe in that moment there are no, you know, major departures or redefinitions for you to be authentic and in your own integrity, but maybe it means that you check somebody, you're still on the same side. Okay, I am on the right side for what I believe and what I hope for this country, but maybe you see some shenanigans on your own side and you're willing to call it out. Some of you know my work. I wear my politics on my sleeve often, so I don't think it'll be shocking for me to say that I happen to hold what we would call progressive views on social and economic and other issues. But frequently, what I'm doing in the New York Times and other places I write is calling BS on my own side. Okay, so I think this is very important work to, and again, it is having a backbone in perhaps opposition to that same group that is there to give you a pat on the back for agreeing with them. It's not always easy work to disagree on your own side, but that may well be an outcome once you've taken this challenge of shifting from an unconscious follower, if you will, to a conscious leader in however a small a sphere that plays out. Maybe it doesn't mean that you check somebody else. Maybe it means you check yourself. There's some word you've been using or idea that you've been assuming was true that you can now see the cracks in. And gosh, there's no more important work than checking ourselves, as far as I'm concerned, and really to a great extent, that's what this whole talk is about. So I'm going to end on a story about really kind of the moment that I woke up to the sorts of ideas that I'm sharing with you tonight. It has to do with what W.E.B. Du Bois called double consciousness or dual consciousness. In his case, that referred to being an African-American man who was highly educated and sometimes, accepted in white circles at a time when members of his race were very rarely had gone to university or were part of these sorts of salons. And he was articulating basically that sense of there being kind of two pieces of oneself. And how did he reconcile that? And how did he then find the, integrity? Just if you go back to the roots of the word is about wholeness. And how did he sense a wholeness about himself even though his relationship to different pieces of the external world around him defined him differently and responded to him in very different terms. My dual consciousness of sorts had to do with class, as I've alluded to before, and I'm going to read just a little bit in closing before we all have a conversation together about really the moment that I stepped over a class dividing line, and that is the moment which is appropriate to an event hosted by KIPCOR and in partnership with Bethel College. And I know that there are probably a lot of students joining tonight. My experience as a first generation college student is that's like the moment when my foot kind of left one world and went into another. And if there are any first generation college students tuning in tonight, I salute you. It is not easy work, and no doubt doubly so in these times. I never had to navigate a pandemic on top of all the inherent struggles economically and culturally and emotionally that are unto the first generation experience. So hats off. This is from the last chapter of Heartland, which is called The Place I Was From. I'm going to end with this, by the way, in case there's like an awkward, weird silence. If we were all in a room together, I assume you would applaud. Okay, I hope you would. In college, I began to understand the depth of the rift that is economic inequality. Roughly speaking, by the way, earlier in this book, I talk about the ways in which class intersects with other aspects of ourselves, be it race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, and so on. So because this passage doesn't overtly say it, I want to note that whenever I'm talking about where I come from, it amounts to a simultaneous racial privilege, which is unjust and that I was born to, simultaneous with economic disadvantage. This is one of the reasons that the United States has such a hard time talking about class, because it requires that we be able to have conversations in which things that are seemingly at odds with each other by some measures also sometimes coexist. In college, I began to understand the depth of the rift that is economic inequality. Roughly speaking, on one side of the rift was the place I was from, laborers, workers, people filled with distrust for the systems that had been ignoring and even spurning them for decades. On the other side were the people who run those systems, basically people with college funds who end up living in cities or moving to one of the expensive coasts. It's much messier than that, of course. But before arriving on campus, I hadn't understood the extent of my family's poverty. Wealth, previously having been represented to me by a friend whose dad was our small town's postmaster and whose mom went to the Wichita Mall every weekend. Woo, if you're going to the mall on the weekend, I mean, I thought that was high cotton. Even at a Midwestern state university, my background, agricultural work, manual labor, rural poverty, teen pregnancies, domestic chaos, pervasive addiction, seemed like a faraway story to the people I met. Most of them were from tidy neighborhoods in Wichita, Kansas City, the greater Chicago area. They used a different sort of English and had different politics. They were appalled that I had grown up with conservative ideas about government and Catholic doctrine against abortion. I was appalled that they didn't know where their food came from or even seemed to care it had always appeared on their plates when they wanted it. There was no language for whatever I represented on campus. To pay my room and board during my freshman year at college, I worked as a tutor for poor middle school students in nearby Kansas City and Topeka in the afternoons, as a stage technician for a performing arts center in the evenings, and as my dorm's front desk attendant overnight. During spring break, I was the trail boss for an environmental cleanup crew. I waited tables too, late night shifts, worth a 45-minute drive to Kansas City because the tips were better there. I knew other kids with jobs, but not many who had absolutely no choice but to work. A young woman in poverty, vulnerable twice over, I was mistreated at many of those jobs. I thought then a question: what would I want for my daughter? I didn't have a daughter at the time. I still don't have a daughter, but it's this thing I would do. I would conceive this idea of, like, if there was some precious innocent being that I was taking care of, then it stands to reason that if, you know, I would bestow some gift unto her, then it should be unto myself too. And the answer to that question in the context of that job was always to quit and find another job. So I would. I felt the tension between my need and my dignity every day. Some days I went hungry because I refused to work somewhere a male boss looked at my body. There are many complicated reasons why so few people cross a socioeconomic divide in any lasting way, but one of the reasons is simple. It is a painful crossing. Those were the hardest years of my life. When I called home, I heard the familiar stories. My 30-year-old cousin didn't know how she would pay her hospital bills, but she had survived colon cancer. At a party Grandma threw at the farm, Grandpa's daughter-in-law rifled through unlocked parked cars to steal cash to buy drugs, my mom speculated, and in the process took my cousin's last $20. Well, my cousin had it, so she beat the shit out of her while my mom cheered her on and Grandpa's son tried to pull them apart. After the party, Mom figured out that her wedding band, which she'd stopped wearing but kept in her purse, was missing. A few days later, she drove an hour from Wichita to a family house in rural Kansas and pounded on the door. She sat on the porch for hours until the woman finally came out and handed over the ring, miraculously not yet sold for drug money. Meanwhile, Dad was on a new job site. His wife was having more health problems, in and out of the hospital, bills, bills, bills. Then I hung up the phone and went to class. Few people knew how much I was struggling both emotionally and financially because I didn't talk to anyone about it or even understand how bad off I was. Knowing I'd never asked for it, my high school cheerleading coach mailed me $300. I put it in a thank you card and mailed it back. Like the conservative laborer who spurns the idea of, quote, handouts, my pride was bigger than my need. I didn't know the term first-generation student and didn't grasp yet that I had in fact grown up poor and was still very much living in poverty. The best I could come up with for describing my situation was that I was a financially independent student. Sometimes I'd say I grew up on a farm. I once took a roommate, a funny, sharp girl raised in lower middle class Wichita, to our family farm, and was stunned to see it through her eyes. Everything was worth exclaiming about. The cows, the pigs, the chickens, the butchering shed, the cow tongue pickling in a jar in the refrigerator, the way every single adult was drinking alcohol. My friend's mouth fell open when my uncle boomed through the front door carrying a plate of flayed raccoon meat to put on the stove. Eating raccoon was remarkable even for us. The occasional turtle or rabbit ended up in the kitchen as novelty maybe, but raccoon seemed plumb trashy. I was embarrassed when my friend told the story again and again back on campus, a situation I found I could control by telling the stories myself. Cows are more pleasant than goats, I'd say, to explain why we had one and not the other, and my college friends would crack up like it was an amazing joke. Grandpa had bought a few goats when I was little, and they had turned out to be a menace. Why did he buy the goats? They would ask, as though the answer were complicated and perhaps had something to do with personal fulfillment. Because they're cheap and they eat weeds, I'd say, and they'd bend over laughing. By then, I'd be laughing too, because I was amazed it was so funny to anyone. In those moments, I saw that mine wasn't as much a sad story as it was a rare one. That better off people's fascination was not just derision, but sometimes honest awe. The distance between my world and my country's understanding of it had been growing because so few people from my place ever ended up on a college campus and beyond to tell its stories. it was a distance I wanted to make smaller. Thank you.
I am pausing because I do want people to give their energy back to Sarah for such a powerful speech and lecture and just all the ways that I know many people, again, felt that your story is their story too. And many of our students probably, most especially, relate a lot to your experiences, Sarah. So I'm going to give one little pause here before we move on. Thank you, everyone. And then before we move into our Q&As, because I can see you guys are lighting that up, I want to just, this is one detail that I neglected to share earlier. There are some folks who are on this call who purchase books through Faith and Life bookstore and are welcome to be on a call with Sarah after this is over. If you did not get an invitation from us, please email Doug Lingle at dlengel, Lengel, at bethelks.edu. DLENGEL at bethelks.edu. So with that, we're going to open it up for people to, let's see what questions we have. And we will try very hard to get to as many questions as possible. And Dan, did you want to begin with the first one?
Sure, I can do that. No problem. So the first question, Sarah, comes from Rebecca Stuckey. And her question is, she's from Austin, Texas, originally from Mound Ridge, Kansas. And she says, or asks, do you believe the deep division we are seeing in our country can be reconciled in the near future, or do you believe it will continue?
Well, first of all, shout out to Austin. I lived in Austin for a couple of years. It's a great town. Believe it or not, I moved there in large part so that I could go country two-stepping. A lot of good dancing in Austin. And I was a little bit less tethered at the moment, and a lot of love. Also, Mound Ridge, Kansas, shout out. This is a very important question, and I think that how we relate to this question has to do with kind of our maturity as a society. So really what I was putting forth in my talk tonight, you know, challenging us to kind of level up with ourselves, is really how I think about what's going on in our country right now, which is we're in, it may seem that things are dissolving, but your farm girl here can tell you that things have to die for new growth to come out. You know what I mean? And so I actually think that all of this is a sign of growth, and a sign that we are entering a new phase. Now, this is a hopeful vision. But I do think that reconciliation will come. But the thing is, like, I'm not about let's reconcile so that we can go back to the way things were. The way things were was the conditions from which this moment resulted. Whether we want to talk about injustice for Black and brown bodies, whether we want to talk about women, whether we want to talk about I mean, there are a host of ways in which, you know, we have claimed that we're about equality, and we certainly are not in our policies and practices and our culture. So what I'm hoping, you know, I'm never about, like, to my mind, we are here tonight to talk in large part about peace and unity, but I absolutely never want to, you know, justice has to come along for that ride. We're never gonna, we're moving backwards if we set aside justice as secondary for the sake of peace and unity. You know, like Representative John Lewis used to talk about good trouble. There is a version of disruption where you are still straight with yourself. You are in your own, you are centered and embodying peace, and yet you are in opposition to a violent state. You know, like that's a way to represent peace too. So I guess what I'm saying is, will the reconciliation come? We got to think about, like, what do we mean by that reconciliation? And if we mean coming together as we allow a new and better society to emerge, and that's the worthy cause, to my mind. That's going to take generations. It's a whole mess of work ahead. I mentioned earlier that I'm 40, and there's not a day that in my own personal path of trying to be some sort of vessel of peace and justice that I entertain the notion that I'm going to see it. I don't believe that I will see it, but I believe that someone will. And the work that we're doing is why that's the case.
Okay. Thank you. Ryan Spone says, as a 5th generation Kansas wheat farm kid here, it took a BS, MS, and PhD in the social sciences to bring myself to a place where I was making a difference via promoting social justice rather than perpetuating the status quo. I appreciate any advice as to how a white male can play a role in building coalitions to promote social justice amongst people who will not be making similar social and economic transformation.
Wow, that is a heavy and important question. Cheryl didn't tell me these were going to be easy tonight. She just, you know, she's like, we're gonna talk, and this is an important point. Congratulations on your journeys, by the way, as a fellow farm kid. First, the point about, you know, what can you do if you were, you know, by no merit or fault of your own, born at the more privileged end of our various continuums of power structures in this country. I have to tell you, my partner is a white male. He's happens to be a white male construction worker who didn't go to college. He's also one of the most brilliant people I know, and one of the most activated, inspired change agents for a better society. I met him at the River Festival in Wichita, Kansas. He was collecting signatures because the city was going to close down a public swimming pool in a overwhelmingly Black and poor neighborhood of Wichita. And so this, by the way, side note to all the young folks present, you can meet people without apps. That was on the banks of the Arkansas River just a few years ago in modern times. Anyway, that's to say that there's like nothing more powerful in terms of allyship than the person who who can move through society relatively safely as a white male. My partner doesn't come from economic privilege, and nor does the questioner, it sounds like. But all the same, you know, in terms of our progress as a society, that identity comes with some keys that unlock some places that women or people of color would have to knock on the door for a really long time. So it can certainly hasten positive transformation. To have folks like yourself on the righteous side. And by the way, and I was just telling my partner this the other night, because I just so admire his good heart in and ideas, which he came by himself. If you are, you know, if you have woken up to the sorts of things that are baked into the questioner's remarks, as a white man, that's you've done some deep digging as far as I'm concerned, because that's power is a drug, and some folks it's such a terrible drug that they won't even admit that they have power. They can't even see it. So just to be seeing clearly and have neither shame nor pride in saying, I'm a white man who wants to do right by folks who have it harder than me. That's beautiful. That's important. We need more of you. So the second part of your question of how do I get through to folks who've had a different experience than myself, it sounds like is how we might boil that down. You know, I think that humility piece that I was talking about earlier is a big part of it. I think too that this sounds like a cliche, but it's so true, and I bet this comes up in KIPCOR's mediation efforts often, is the listening thing. We love to run our mouths right now on social media, and we're very much a watch my TikTok video culture. And there's some really cool and empowering aspects about that, and democratizing aspects to those sort of media for folks who previously didn't have means to be heard or seen. But by and large, we're not very good at listening right now. So I find that just before you have to make your argument, really extending the space of hearing how someone came to their argument, just the silence and the surprising, frankly, difference of feeling if you're speaking to someone and they actually truly quiet down and listen, rather than just waiting for their moment to jump in with their argument that tells you how stupid you are. That space just shifts the energy of the dynamic of a conversation in such a way that regardless of whether you end up agreeing about the ideas, at least the energy is there to conduct a positive and peaceful transfer of energy, which is foundational and essential if the ideas are ever going to get across. Easier said than done.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Sarah. Next question comes from Todd Flory. First of all, thank you for sharing your story, Sarah. I'm a public school teacher, and in your book, Heartland, you mentioned former teachers you had growing up. Have you heard any feedback about your book from any of the teachers you mentioned?
Oh my gosh, I'm going to get a prop. I didn't know I was going to have a visual presentation. Hang on. This is a photo of me and my 4th and 5th grade teacher at my book launch of Heartland in Wichita. I hadn't seen him. He's 80 something in this photo. God bless him. I hadn't seen him since I was a kid. I mean, 30 years or something. And he showed up at the book launch, and he has thanked. Well, not only is I'm not sure that he's in the acknowledgments, but I talk about him in the book, as Todd said. And so I have had a few kind of full circle moments where I heard from someone who really played a heavy hand in my cultivating my own, inclinations creatively toward writing. So that's been a beautiful thing. And by the way, rah rah for public schools, because we don't talk about it enough. But speaking of democracy, as far as I'm concerned, that's the backbone.
Okay. This says, this is from Renee Zwall. Hello, my name is Renee Zwall, and I'm originally from Atchison, Kansas, but I am currently in graduate school in College Station, Texas. You mentioned that the get out culture that is often in rural areas, and have definitely felt that, and was wondering how you would suggest that people, especially young people, reconcile the relationship of where they're from and expectations of who they should be. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And she's from Atchison, was that right, Cheryl?
That is correct.
Yeah, I love Atchison. Great town. Of course, home to Amelia Earhart, one of our famous daughters. Cheryl, in her lovely introduction for my talk, spoke about a podcast that I produced and hosted called The Homecomers, and it's very much it's only 6 episodes. It's kind of like a little series unto itself, where I talk to a very kind of diverse cast of rural characters from different regions of the country, and kind of honing in on different issues. So I would recommend that, giving that a listen to really dive deeper into this issue. It's called The Homecomers because, that's a term actually that was coined by Wes Jackson of the Land Institute in Salina, which is a world-class research institute working on development of basically breeding perennial grains that would allow for a more sustainable agriculture with such the high population that we now have as a species. And what Wes meant by homecomers is basically that the potential act of coming back to the place you come from. And why would you ever need to go back to the place that you come from? Well, because you had to get out, because for well over a century, frankly, we have had policies at the federal and other levels that that made a sort of stranglehold on small rural communities, and required that ambitious kids who wanted to have a shot financially and professionally had no choice but to leave sometimes places that they loved dearly, because there just weren't opportunities where they came from. I happen to think that it's essential that somehow shift for the balance of our country to get sorted out. But that's a whole different question. I think asking a more kind of personal and intimate inquiry about how do you reconcile the getting out with the being from the place. And for me, it did in some literal ways come full circle. I mentioned that I'm coming to you from rural Kansas tonight, but I indeed, lived in New York City for a few years. That's where I established a lot of the connections and professional understandings that were foundational to my career. I've lived in Kansas City for a couple of years, Austin a little bit. I've been in Kansas most of my life, but I've had to sort of it's the oldest kind of archetypal narrative of the human story as it happens, is the leaving home, and you go on the Odyssey, and you get some important assets that you then bring back to home. And so that was my path, and it came full circle. It doesn't have to be so literal for other folks who left the place that they're from. You might never go back to Atchison as a resident. You might not want to. You might want to and find that the path that you're on, the opportunities are not hospitable there. But you know what I always encourage folks to do is to not to think about, well, first of all, never be ashamed of where you came from. That should go without saying, but perhaps it doesn't in a culture that, you know, frankly, kind of turns its nose up at places like small town Kansas, whether it's in TV shows and movies that lampoon rural people with a particular negative stereotype, or whether it's headlines that written from urban coastal centers that like completely miss the reality that rural Kansas, rural America is actually a diverse place. It's not all white folks. It's not all conservatives. It's not the things that have been sort of packaged into our shorthand for rural America are really just reductive, and there are very few groups that it would be okay in polite society to just sort of make these wild assumptions about. So the first thing is not being ashamed of where you come from, regardless of the messages to the contrary. And the second thing is just, you don't have to, you can take it with you. Whether you move back or not, whether you want to or not, there are, I guarantee you, whatever challenges and hardships and negative aspects came with that upbringing, so too there were blessings and strengths. And some of the blessings and strengths I have found have served me very well in a profession that's centered in New York City. So even if you're not there in person, you can take it with you in your heart and mind, and then someday you might see fit to, as they say, give back in various ways. The way that I'm most concerned with rural Kansas, by the way, is as someone who's kind of a child of industrial agriculture. Even though we were a small family farm, we were definitely kind of a cog in the wheel of a large, already kind of corporatized system. One of my big concerns has to do with land conservancy. I'm kind of a big proponent of public lands and conservation with a kind of environmentalist lens. So yeah, however you relate to your home place, the most important thing is that you define it, not those movies that make fun of it.
Okay, thank you. The next question comes from a fellow Sarah. This would be Sarah Malcolm. First of all, she says, Sarah, thank you for using your platform to speak of the importance of public education in your life and in our society. As a public school teacher, I have always seen my job as doing my best to put students like you out into the world. However, with everything going on in the greater world and locally, I feel as though I need to direct more of my energy into defending and bringing attention to our rural schools and communities. I am at a loss of how to start to do this. I guess my question is, how do I bring attention to my students and their experiences? And she says, by the way, I'm from rural Lyon County, Kansas.
That is great. Well, first of all, you are my hero. I wasn't joking when I said that I think that, or exaggerating when I said that, to my mind, public education is the backbone of our democracy, because, during my talk, I was going on and on about information and its power. That has a lot to do with the media industry, but it also has to do with history books and classrooms and the ways that we get woken up to knowledge. And, a kid like me, and certainly kids worse off than myself, never would have come by that sort of knowledge if it weren't for an investment in public education by our communities. So And Dan, just to make sure that I'm understanding her question correctly, she's asking how can she's feeling like she needs to shift from not just educating these kids, but being mindful of all the challenges that they're facing in the world.
Yeah, and that she needs to direct more of her energy into defending and bringing attention to our schools and communities. And how do you start to do that?
Yes.
And bring attention to the students and their experiences.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, I bet that you're a great teacher, because anybody that asks that question, you know, is a sensitive soul who is trying to, you know, save the world. No big deal. And nobody's better equipped to do that than teachers, as far as I'm concerned. The unfortunate thing about our moment, which is kind of inherent to your question, implicit, is that so many groups of talented, amazing people are having to divert their energy from just doing their thing to like defending the thing can exist at all. You know, there are so many parallels to this question. So for here we have a public school teacher who's like, I'm teaching kids and that's my calling, but I also need to like make sure people know that we should be supporting public schools and also all these issues that are affecting the kids in my classroom, some of whom I bet are hungry, and some of their parents have been laid off during COVID, and some of them are in 3-generation households where they are, you know, potentially endangering senior, you know, age grandparents in their households as they acquire this essential education. And it's like, it's too much for, it's too much, but that is where we find ourselves. I think that, you know, the primary work, the most important focus has to be the work itself. And I think about in this way, I think it might have been Toni Morrison, the great author who recently passed, who she said about her work as a Black woman and an esteemed author. There were so many, who used to be an editor at a large publishing house in New York. There were so many in a racist society, so many forces at work to distract her from her work, because you know, she was obviously, you know, sensitive to the racism in our society because she suffered the brunt of it. But yet she also, she felt like, if I have to turn into a full-time activist because I'm a Black woman, and then I can't, and then I'm not writing these important novels that somebody sent me to write, then in some ways, I have let those forces defeat me. So that, you know, there are a lot of different tacks to take, and I'm not saying that this is the right one, but to me, I feel like there is something powerful about saying, as much, you know, I am a teacher first, and God help us, there better be somebody on the streets fighting to save these schools, because I don't have enough energy to teach these kids and save the schools. That's why people of color need white allies, because you can't do the work of surviving a racist state while you're also the only one fighting racism. Like I hope that all of us listening to this question will then keep it in mind to like raise the flag for public schools, because our teachers need to focus on those kids. Unfortunately, you are sensing that the moment requires that your energy be more spread out. I guess what I'm encouraging you to do is somehow, you know, never stray from your first mission, because if too much energy is diverted from that, then in a paradoxical way, the forces at work that would seek to tear down the integrity of public education are kind of winning if teachers can't get their work done.
So Gasper asks, what is your vision of reconciliation for the next 10 years? Nice, short and sweet question.
Yeah, and I should probably start answering shorter too, because I know a whole bunch of folks still have questions yet. The next 10 years. So we're in 2020. That puts us at 2030. I would be tickled pink if by 2030, you know, we had made major policy changes in the direction of universal health care, living wage, protections against systemic racism and violence for marginalized communities. I say that because what does that have to do with reconciliation? Again, to go back to my previous point, the fractures in our society right now are a result of untenable conditions. There are some people who have been radicalized toward hate because the conditions in which they were living made them vulnerable to that sort of manipulation. There are also people who have been radicalized toward justice for the same reasons. But at any rate, we have found ourselves at a moment where apparently our systems are breaking down. And so if by 2030 we have made important gains in some policy directions, I think that's important, because otherwise, if we're still a nation where there's 40 million people living in poverty, most of those are single mothers with children, 100 million more people living in low-income households, Black folks feeling like they can't walk down the street without being in physical peril. That's those are not people can't access health care across lines of race and heck, even class. There's middle class white folks who aren't getting health care. These are conditions that flow from federal policy that will again and again propagate the same breakdowns over and over and over unless our laws change. As I kind of hinted at in my talk, I happen to think that laws reflect our culture, and our culture reflects our hearts and minds. So that's why those of us who aren't policymakers need to be working on ourselves and our communities to make sure that that happens.
Okay, thank you. And the next question comes from Sophia. She says, I love the idea of being in the place where you're from and emphasizing local community as a way of healing our tribalism and our divides. Do you have any thoughts about how to do that if your family was more of a wandering one due to jobs and instability?
And how to do, can you reread that last part?
Sure. You know, she talked about loving the idea of being, you know, in a place where you're from, emphasizing local community. But do you have thoughts about how to do that if your family was more of a wandering one due to jobs?
Got ya. Okay. Wow, this is a really interesting question, because I've had a lot of people tell me in my travels and also just in my professional sphere, since so much what I'm about has to do with place, which is kind of to some extent we're like a post-place society, because well, prior to COVID at least, there was a particular class of people at least is very mobile professionally. It's not like you work in the same place for 40 years and get your pension and retire there. That was a kind of old previous version of this country. Now somebody works in one place for 5 years, then they move to another place, they move around. Very few people who are we're a transient nation, I guess what I'm saying. And the fact that I'm so concerned with place makes me a little bit of an outlier in that conversation. But I think that it is actually one of the social ills and one of the under discussed conditions that make our society kind of ripe for conflict, is that you know, you don't have to be connected to a very specific literal place, you know, as home for this to be true, but folks need to feel connected to place in some way, just for I mean, that's like evolutionary biology. This isn't just me like musing about something that happens to correlate with what I do as a writer. People tell me all over this country, I envy you that you know where home is for you. I wish that I had that sense of kind of honing pigeon, you know, for home. And so what do you do if home was a little more amorphous or vague? I think that presents a really cool opportunity, is that you get to choose now, because, you know, the thing is, like, if I hadn't been born in rural Kansas, it's as many riches as this place offers, it's highly unlikely that I would have ended up in this place. That's just not how, like, population streams flow. And I wouldn't have known anything about Kansas and what it has to offer. There's a beautiful line in the introduction to a book by the owner of a little diner in Lawrence, Kansas, called Lady Bird Diner. She just put out this collection of essays about navigating the pandemic as a small business. And in the introduction, she says something along the lines of, like, she was lucky to have been born in her place. And I thought, wow, that describes me. I happen to be born in my place, but that is not true for a lot of people. You have the opportunity, perhaps in your travels and experiences, to choose what that place is, and to, if you like, create roots. You know, there was generations back someone who left East Germany, or what was then called Prussia, who is sort of the my paternal forebearer, and for him, this land was a completely foreign situation, and now it feels like home to me. So good luck on your journeys. That sounds like an adventure.
Okay, Cheryl, did you want to take one more, or should we wrap that up?
Let's see. I think we can do one more.
Okay.
And I am so, you know, it's terrible because you all have some great questions here. So please don't take offense. I'm just scanning to find one where it can kind of wrap this up. So we just, let's see. Well, okay, this is not, this is one that is a potential, this is from Larry and Lena B. A potentially trivial question from East Chatham, New York, but recently from Wichita. Is there a story about why you only have one painted fingernail?
You know, I was realizing that in the camera it appears that way, but I actually have two different colors of fingernail polish. It's like a light pink, and I was just feeling frisky, Larry. I just thought this one finger is gonna be blood red. We all need self-care. We gotta, whatever it takes in these times.
So anyway, with that, I mean, we have several questions, and maybe we can speak with Sarah about, you know, we definitely can send those to her, but you all are, we knew that this group, they are fearless and very, very brilliant in the ways that they inquire. So no doubt there were many good questions, and we could continue on in great engagement. So with this, we're going to start to wind down now. And just want to, this is so hard for me because this has been such a wonderful, wonderful day and just great engagement. Sarah actually met with a group of Bethel students and faculty earlier today, and y'all, I wish people could have been there for that conversation. It was really spirited, and our students engaged in great ways, and some of the faculty engaged in some of the great ways with Sarah. So at this point, I'm transitioning into, my heart gets heavy because I think about all the people who helped make this day possible. And my list is long, and if this was a show, this would roll like credits, but I don't think it would do justice because I really want people to hear me say their names, but I'm going to go quickly. First of all, the communications department at Bethel College. Trisha Clark, director, with Melanie Zerker, Erin Myrtle, and Taylor Brown. They helped to create all of the printed media, all of the video, visual things that you saw, and any other media that went out came from this department. Damon Clausen, who is up in our sound booth right now as we speak, holding all of this together. He is our Director of Media Services, and thank you so much, Damon. Then we also have the Development Department. As many of you knew, this was also a day of fundraising for us, and we worked very closely with the Development Department. Brad Coleman, thank you so much. Greta Hebert, thank you. We also would be remiss if we did not thank our Bethel College faculty and students who, as I mentioned before, engaged so greatly with Sarah today, and their support and energy around this has been amazing. And if you didn't hear, all of the first year students this year read Sarah's book for their first year seminar. So many of them had questions for her around that. I also need to thank, we had a peace lecture planning committee. Many of these people are also advisory council members for KIPCOR, but I'm going to name them: Richard Zerger, Richard Walker, Gary Flory, John McCabe-Yankee, Ruth Smucker, Ada Schmidt-Tiesen, Trisha Clark, Taylor Brown, Marlene Fall, Leanne Taves, Christine Downey Schmidt, Donna Becker, Dorothy Nickel-Friesen, Damon Clausen, Larry Lee. And then I must name someone who has really held me up a lot in this effort is Dr. Bob Milliman. He is our Vice President for Academic Affairs at Bethel College, but he is someone that I work closely with. He is the person I report to at Bethel, and he has supported me every step of the way with the vision that I had, and just always was positive and saying, yes, it can be done. Go do this. I think these are great ideas. And we all need people like that in our corner. I do want to thank John Gehring and his wife, Deborah, who has been a supporter and sent me the sweetest message today in support of KIPCOR and the work that we do. Deborah, thank you for being here and supporting us in this way. And lastly, I would be remiss if I did not thank my fabulous staff. When I said I wanted to do this, they just let me go. and they supported me every step of the way. So Doug Lingle, Dan Wasink, and Kirsten Zerger, you all mean the world to me. And I am so grateful to have had an opportunity to have a lot of fulfilled dreams by just creating this moment at this time. There are so many ways that, you know, when we talk about what's happening in society right now, many people in our field lost their jobs in this time because much of the work that we do is in person. And so when we think about the fact that KIPCOR, we were able to not only take our work to a virtual platform, but the work has increased. And we're grateful. And we're grateful very much to this community for that reason. And without the staff that I have, the work that we do couldn't be done. I've seen them go from people who normally do a lot of work in person to learning all of the technical aspects of how to do this virtually, and not just do it, but do it well. So with that, I take my hat off to each of you. Thank you very much. So with that, and I also want to thank Lindsay Bonstill, who is one of us now. She is also part of our staff as our student worker who has been with us for going on 2 years. So thank you, Lindsay. I must thank my family and you all. I love you all and thank you for your support at home. So with that, Sarah, thank you so much for this moment. And I'm going to pass it over to Dan before I say my final words.
Okay. Thank you, Cheryl. And I'll be brief because I know we're running late. But as many of you know, many of the people here are regular viewers of our film series. The KIPCOR film series has been going on for, gosh, 35, 40 years. We have our next film coming up. So the beat goes on here at KIPCOR. And thank you for that, Damon. There's a slide that talks about our, well, not that one. There you go. I know you can't see all that because of the gray bar, but the film is called Cooked: Survival by Zip Code. And this is a film that talks about the deadly 1995 Chicago heat wave that killed many people, actually. And they used the heat wave as a way to illustrate how minorities and low-income citizens are most negatively impacted by natural disasters. Just where you live, the zip code you live in can determine whether you live or die in a natural disaster. And as you can see, we have we're doing this differently this time. So I would ask you to go to our website, pay attention to the instructions, because you need to view the film ahead of time, starting on Sunday, November 8th, and going through November 14th. You have that window to view the film. You can see the link and the password to view the film. And then once you view the film, go to the KIPCOR website to register for the film discussion, which will happen on Sunday, November 15th at 2 p.m. So watch the film ahead of time, sign up to come to the film discussion. That will be with Christy Miller Hesaid. She is a Heston resident and a postdoctoral associate in environmental anthropology at the University of Maryland. This film was also delayed from back in March, I think, because of COVID. So we're doing this differently, and you have an opportunity to view the film starting Sunday, and then sign up again on our website for the actual film discussion on the 15th. So thanks for putting that slide up, Damon. You can take that down now. I appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you at that film discussion. It promises to be another great KIPCOR event. And back to Cheryl. And Cheryl, I just want to thank you too. You left yourself out in the thank yous. You spearheaded this. This was your idea. You really stuck with it. You worked day and night, literally weekends. And I know how much time you put into this in addition to all your regular duties. So I admire all the energy you put into this and pulling this off. So a big thank you to you for your leadership on this.
Thank you, Dan. And Doug, will you please show yourself if you could? I want everyone to see you, Doug. And thank you. This is Kirsten Zerger is out there. I know she is out there on the webinar, but this is who puts together what we do at KIPCOR. We are a small but mighty staff. And with that, I'll just say lastly, Sarah, you brought up the word humility. And I think that will resonate most deeply with like the most powerful thing that you shared. That is what it's going to require in the days ahead. And I know this time tomorrow, we may be in a new regime in some ways, one way or the other. It doesn't matter who is the leader of this country, but it's going to be a new day, I believe, in a lot of ways, because we have to find ways to come together. It is imperative for our survival. And so with that, at KIPCOR, that is what we aim to do every day. And so again, if this is of interest to you, we would love it if you would support us. And thank you once again for coming here and being a part of this. And blessings to you, and have a wonderful, wonderful night. And we will see you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey. So everybody's taking their 10-minute break now.
Yep, I'm going to get off this one and open up
Okay.
the other one right away so that people can log in and be ready. And then
Right.
I will let people in out of the waiting room at 9:06.
Okay,
Okay?
will do.